We are the Commanders. We are the Commanders.
The Commanders, the Washington Commanders.
That's right.
Happy anniversary, everybody. Anthony, you really had to do that to people to start the show? That's really what you wanted everyone, as I'm live from the Bethesda Theater, backstage, here ahead of our event tonight. You really had to remind them that today is the day 2 years ago, 2/2, that catastrophe took place? That's what you're taking into Friday?
Craig, I wouldn't be a good producer if I didn't let everybody know that today is 2/22 anniversary.
Yeah, it's the 2 anniversary of 2/2/22. Man.
Yes, sir.
I will say it is fun to look at how different things are now, because that day was just a cataclysmic disaster, and we don't need to relitigate all of that. It has been told to me in no uncertain terms that certainly that was, well, there are some people that are still here now that had something to do with that. It was kind of signing off on what Dan wanted to do. He was very involved in all the things that were terrible about that day. You know, because, for instance, their social media department put together an awesome collection of historical videos and did a really great job. And had they just launched the thing that way, that probably would have been fine. Instead, they put Doug on the Today Show with no real plan. Their big announcement was preceded by a laundry list of all the crimes they had committed. And then that they gave us a soundbite that will live on our show forever. I mean, even before I had this show, I made sure that when I did a show, I had the "We Are the Commanders" ready. And here we are 2 years later. Just think back to if we had told you then, don't worry, we know this day is not very fun, but in 2 years, you will have an owner who is not Dan Snyder, who is thought of as one of the bright minds in the sport now in terms of ownership, like a guy that people are going to want to work for. You'd have an assistant general manager from the San Francisco 49ers running your team, and you're going to have one of the better coaching candidates in the cycle coming to you. I know that last part some of you disagree with, but we'll get there. But this is definitely like, okay, think back to where you were then and all the investigations looming and all the things, Anthony, and where we are today. The only thing that's actually still the same is that silly name that most people hate. You're not as good on the button as I am.
I'm not. But you're not here to play it, so
no.
Somebody got to do it, you know?
Yeah. I was really more interested in your than Doug Williams, but
Craig Melvin.
Oh, what you gonna? Yeah, or Craig Melvin's. I mean, I would love to get Craig's thoughts.
Yeah,
we have his spouse on the show every once in a while. You know, that's Lindsay Zarniak's husband. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it is definitely a new day. Where we'll spend a lot of our day today is obviously talking about the new coach, not the name. And I do think it's kind of the thing where, Anthony, if we didn't have this big news, we'd probably spend the day asking fans on the phones, like, do you want to rebrand? And being told yes 90% of the time. And it is something that is definitely on the table. I mean, Don Van Natta has been with us multiple times from ESPN talking about how, like, he's been told that is something that will be on the table long term. Basically, the Harris ownership group refuses to take it off the table. The only thing they've taken off the table is going back to the old nickname. But at the end of the day, today is much more about the search for the people that will work for Dan Quinn. Now that we've got the guy that's going to work for Adam Peters, and we got the guy that's going to work for Josh Harris, and we're layering out, ownership done, front office done, head coach done. I think there is this search for the next great OC and who's going to help Dan on defense. And I think what's happened that's a little bit weird, and we'll take some calls on this next, and then ultimately you'll hear some thoughts from Logan about this. You'll hear Kevin Burkhardt from Fox Sports later on in the show, and then as our guys start showing up for the live event here at the Bethesda Theater, we will get some of their thoughts. Like I know Denton Day is here, and Denton's just here hanging out. He's not on stage with us tonight. It's just the host on stage tonight. All what feels like 78 of us between the two stations. But we'll put a microphone in Denton's face for sure. And then as the junks get here, and if Sheehan comes, we'll definitely have Kevin sit down and we'll talk about all this throughout the rest of the show. But I feel like what's happened with Quinn is a little bit silly because everyone is like, oh my God, the hire is so important. The OC hire, the this hire, the that hire. And it's not that I disagree with it. It's just like, no kidding. Like, obviously that's really important. You tell me what head coach, his staff isn't important. I mean, I think one of the flaws of Bill Belichick the last couple of years is his staff has been not very good, especially on the offensive side. Like, yeah, Mac Jones has been probably a bigger problem for them. But part of the reason Mac Jones is a problem is he tried to employ, Joe Judge and Matt Patricia as the offensive coordinators one year, and then he brings back Bill O'Brien, but there's not enough other people around him in New England that's actually a good offensive staff. And, like, that's a huge problem. I think then you look at the teams that are great, and they're the teams that get rated every year. Kyle's pass game coordinator gets rated every single year, and he's always got another guy. And Klint Kubiak is that next guy, and we'll see if he's the next guy rated and if he becomes the OC here. You look at how many different guys have gone from LA, and you think eventually it's like, well, can the next guy be as good? How can there possibly be another guy? But they know how to develop coaches. And that coach selection and coach development is essential no matter who the head coach is. And I'd rather, for that specific task, have a guy like Dan Quinn, who's got a very healthy Rolodex, compared to a guy like Mike McDonald, who's worked in one organization his entire life and doesn't have the connections of a guy who's been in the NFL for 20 years. So not to say that there aren't other perks of Mike McDonald, not to say that I wouldn't necessarily even preferred him as a head coach when push came to shove. But I think for this very critical stage, people have somehow put an undue amount of pressure on Dan Quinn, like this matters more for him than it would for others, when the reality is, as Mike McDonald builds his staff in Seattle and all these other new head coaches build their staffs, and frankly, as Mike McCarthy has to rebuild his defensive staff in Dallas with DQ coming here, that's just as important for all of them as it is for Quinn here in Washington. Take some of your calls on that next. And obviously, there's some names that have come out, including Chip Kelly. Interested? Not. Why? Why not? We'll discuss with you next. 301-230-0980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It is on a Friday, live from the Bethesda Theater, the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Always live on the free Odyssey app. Taking your calls, 301-230-0980. Anthony, this could be a real test of my ADD today.
What?
There's a lot happening.
Oh, where you are?
I'm backstage. You know, people are starting to send text messages about stuff. There's just like all kinds of stuff that's happening, and this could be a test. That's all I'm saying. I don't know that I'm doing great so far. I feel like there's a lot happening.
It's early.
It is early.
It's early. It's a lot of anticipation for tonight's event. I think you're just a little anxious. That's all it is.
I definitely am. I'm excited. I'm excited for tonight. This should be a lot of fun. Obviously, Bethesda Theater is where we're having our 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980 live event. It's presented by M Street Bank. I would say go to BethesdaTheater.com for tickets, but I've been telling you guys to do that for 2 weeks, and I don't think we have any tickets anymore. I think we're sold out. So, sucks to be you if you're not coming. That's kind of how that goes. Oh, no. The boss man just walked by. Can we just raffle those tickets off on the air that you just texted about? Can we just do that? For the highest bidder. I thought this was whole. Can I make more money off of it? No, that's definitely not. I think I signed that I can't do that. Okay. You continue to do whatever you were doing. All right. I'm going to continue to do my radio show before he gets back off that elevator and fires me. So here's what we got today. Obviously, we're talking a lot about Dan Quinn and what is next for the Commanders in terms of their staffing. I will say this. My initial instinct last night when I saw the report about Chip Kelly was that I thought that was ridiculous, and it sounded very much like a report that that was an agent trying to get his guy a little bit more love. And then I found out that maybe there's a little bit more substance to that report. You start to see it in a couple more places, and you're like, maybe there is something there. Here is what I am interested in when it comes to the Commanders' offensive coordinator job. I think that I would like to see a coordinator from the Shanahan tree. And obviously that is not a super original thought. This is the best tree in football. But I think it's important to ultimately understand why this is the best tree in football and why I prefer that tree compared to going with an outside hire. I will say on the Chip Kelly front, you could do definitely worse. I'd prefer Chip Kelly to, like, Brian Schottenheimer did a really good job with Mike McCarthy last year in Dallas, but some of these guys that are kind of mediocre OCs that have been around, like, I'm not really that interested in. Chip did go 10-6 his first 2 years in Philadelphia, and the roster that he was terrible with in San Francisco was a terrible roster. Offensively, they were crapola pretty much across the board. So there's that. And I think he had personnel control in Philadelphia, and that was a huge mistake. So here, where he's just the OC, and with what he's done with UCLA's offense to kind of modernize it and put it, on the make it a little bit more pro-friendly, and I think the pro game coming back towards the college game a little bit, all those things make me, I would say, not completely cold to Chip Kelly, but lukewarm. Meanwhile, I think the thing you have to understand about the Shanahan-McVay tree is those two guys, and it started with Kyle for sure, but those two guys have a level of detail about the game that is unmatched. The reason they are so successful is because they think of freaking everything, and specifically Kyle. All due respect to Sean, who's pretty damn close, and there's a lot of great coaches that do this as well. But like my familiarity with Kyle via Logan is much more. I'm much more knowledgeable about the way he does it, and obviously we see it around the league in a major way with how many OCs come from that tree, and how many head coaches have come from that tree. Kyle demands. Say you have a play idea. You're like, oh man, I saw this thing. I think this would work. You bring the play to Kyle. He's gonna add. It's a route concept. Hey, I think on this side of this formation, we could get this guy open and we could create a big play. He'll go, okay. Against what coverage? You're like, it's a great cover 3 beater. Okay, well, what are our answers against cover 2? Okay, go back, get that play out of here. What are our answers against cover 1? What are our answers against quarters, 6? Whatever other zone coverages defenses are playing, these amoeba zone match coverages these days. What if they match this guy? What if they're whatever, right? You finally figure out those things. Okay, well, what's the front end look like? Okay, well, what does it look like against this front? What does it look like against, how do you protect it here? What if they blitz this guy? Literally every single thing that could happen against this play better be accounted for, or it's not going in the playbook. That is how Kyle challenges his coaches, and it's part to like challenge them, but it's also because he wants all of those freaking answers. He doesn't want to go into a situation where, you call a play because it's 3rd and whatever, and they've always played this coverage, and you think you got him, and they mix it up, and then you're screwed. He wants to make sure his players have answers. And so his coaches better have answers before they give a play to their players. And that level of thoroughness, that level of detail is why Kyle Shanahan's produced Mike McDaniel, Matt LaFleur, Bobby Slowick, and hopefully in my wish list, Klint Kubiak is just the next guy in that lane, and he's coming here to be the OC. That's what I would like. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that, working with a young, high-profile quarterback is kind of a new thing. They didn't do it very well with Trey Lance, although there was not really a chance to do it with Trey Lance because of the injuries and the timing, and then all of a sudden they're like, man, this Purdy guy's pretty good. Terrible pun, kind of half-intended, kind of just happened, sorry. But obviously Purdy is a young quarterback, and Klint Kubiak's been working with him for 2 years and, making this thing go in San Francisco. And that the title that Klint Kubiak holds is passing game coordinator, which is the exact title that Mike McDaniel held 2 years ago, and Bobby Slowick held the year after that, and then, or I guess 3 years ago for McDaniels, 2 years ago for Slowick, and last year for Kubiak. That seems like a pretty good position to pull from. The responsibilities of that job seem to very well prepare you to be an offensive coordinator in the National Football League. I also think it's important to note that Slowick and McDaniel hadn't called plays before. and they ultimately get their jobs as OC and head coach in Miami or Houston, respectively, and they can do it. They're prepared. Kyle has a way of making sure that his guys are ready. And Sean is very similar. And I think when Andrew Siciliano was on with us, he told us that great story about how, during the preseason, Sean literally just gives up the headset. And he's on it, but he's out there just supervising. He's letting, a defensive head coach or an assistant head coach be the head coach. He's letting a linebackers coach be the defensive coordinator. He's letting, his offensive head coaches, a guy like Zach Taylor way back in the day, call plays and get that experience in the preseason so that they're ready whenever it is that their time ultimately comes. And I think that preparedness, again, the level of detail, the professionalism, understanding the process of how these things get done and get done well, prepares these guys for these jobs in a way that a lot of other systems don't. And you see then the same thing happen now in the grandchild system, if you will. If Kyle's I guess it's the child, you get the next generation, whatever that is, right? Kyle, it happens. He gets guys ready, or you just call it they grew up around the game and did a good job learning. But Klint Kubiak, whose dad is Gary Kubiak, Brian Callahan, whose dad is Bill, now just got hired as the Tennessee Titans head coach because he was forced to be prepared at an extremely high level by Zach Taylor in Cincinnati. And so these coaching trees demand excellence. I mean, even Shane Waldron has Dave Canellis in Seattle. Canellis goes to Tampa. Now Canellis head coach in Carolina. Who did Waldron work for? McVay. I don't know that everyone fully understands how wide the branches of this tree go. And I would also say that's another reason why I want to hire from it. Because when let's say Klint Kubiak is the next guy and he's really the next guy. So 3 years from now, we have to deal with the champagne problem that Jaden Daniels is amazing and Klint Kubiak is the hot young head coach candidate as the Commanders are making the NFC title game. And I was like, oh no, we're gonna lose Klint Kubiak. 3/4 of the league comes from this coaching tree on offense. There's a quarterback's coach, a tight end's coach, hopefully in your building that is ready. But if not, certainly somewhere else in the league who something else goes wrong and they get blown out or out of a job or someone else is ready for a raise. And there's just more options to keep continuity when you go that direction. I would say that is a bigger concern for a guy like Chip Kelly, who kind of does his own thing. I think he's implemented a lot of stuff off of some of those trees. He's done a lot of studying of those trees for sure and brought some of that to the college game. But I do think that the way that this West Coast Shanahan McVay tree has evolved, you now have a bunch of different guys who are super prepared everywhere, and they're bringing along coaches at that same stringent level. And they've also kind of evolved and adapted to personnel in a way that there's tweaks on it. And maybe whatever they're running here in Washington, if there isn't an immediate candidate in-house, which I think there will definitely be plans to be, that you can find something similar as these systems evolve and adapt to their personnel around the league. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Logan played for Dan Quinn, said it's the most fun that he's ever had in his football career. You'll hear more about Logan Paulson's thoughts on DQ to DC next. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. guessing that is going to be something that happens today. I've been told by a little bird that perhaps Monday the introductory press conference could happen. So we will obviously be hearing from him eventually, but now we just continue to talk about him. And who better to do it than someone who played for him? That would be you, sir. As folks watching on YouTube can see the graphic. That's not my name there. That is yours, who played for Dan Quinn back in 2018 with Atlanta. And Logan, I mean, I'm just going to give you the floor. I obviously did a full 3-hour show yesterday talking about this, and I certainly will reiterate some of those thoughts on the podcast. But you hear the news, Dan Quinn's the guy. What immediately goes through your head?
Yeah, I mean, it feels honestly kind of like a dream a little bit. You know what I mean? Because like Adam Peters is a guy that I had a connection with, and a guy that I know, and a guy that I have a lot of respect for. And then Dan is a guy. Again, you bump into guys over your playing career, and you're just like, this guy's a special person. And I mean that with like the utmost respect, in the sense that like he's motivate and get the most out of the players on a day-to-day basis, I thought was incredible. So I just think it's a tremendously, like, in terms of just like quality human beings who've had success in the NFL. I think this is pretty fantastic. So I'm excited about it. And I know there's some people who, maybe feel differently. I think as we talk through Dan Quinn and what he's done and, my experience with him, I think maybe people feel a little differently. So.
Yeah, I mean, the early pushback is that it's Ron Rivera 2.0. And I'm not going to be obtuse enough to say I don't understand it on the surface. I just think they're two very different people in two very different situations. And the short version of it is simply this. Like, Dan Quinn is a really good football coach who's being hired to be a football coach. And by the way, I think he's a better football coach than Ron Rivera. We don't need to spend time debating that, and time will tell ultimately in terms of this role. But on a bigger structural level, like, Ron Rivera was hired in this very silly coach-centric model that Dan Snyder modeled off of other places that didn't actually have that model work. Like, he thought that's what was going on in Seattle, and it wasn't. He thought that's what was going on in New England. It was, but it was a huge problem in New England. Right. And he gave Ron Rivera all this power, and I think Ron very quickly realized, like, that was a bad idea. And instead of giving it up, he tried to just power on through it, and 4 years later, here we are. Dan Quinn is being hired to be the football coach. It is not personnel. It is not scouting. It is not any of that stuff. His involvement of that will be that of a coach to say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. These are the holes. This is what I need. His job is going to be to coach. And I think that is really exciting, because that also was a downfall of Dan's in Atlanta. He did have some personnel control, was a little bit more involved in those processes. And you talked about when we we're discussing him as a candidate, that one of the things that maybe he wishes he had done more was be more involved on the defensive side of the ball down there in Atlanta. And I'm curious kind of what the setup will be for him here. But ultimately, the job for him is to coach the football team. And I think that in itself is going to make whoever they hired more successful, and especially a guy like Dan Quinn, who's very, very good at coaching football teams.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think, like, when you get a talent like Adam Peters, you want to lean on that, lean on his expertise, and ultimately, like, it's going to be Dan's team, and I think that's how it should be. But I do think you have a guy who's excellent identifying talent and understanding how to fit the talent to the scheme. And so I think if Dan can be very clear, and Dan will be able to be very clear, he's a great communicator about what he's looking for from a player standpoint. I think Adam's going to be able to go out in free agency and through the draft and find some of those guys. So I think that's why this is an exciting proposition. And I also think, like, it's just Ron has there's a traditional nature to Ron, which I have a lot of respect for, right? He's a player's coach. I think he's a good guy, but there's an energy to Dan that is very unique to Dan. And I say this, like, not to besmirch Ron, but to just kind of show you how special Dan is. Like, I've said this a couple of different places, and I'm going to say it here again. Like, I never had more fun playing football in my time in the NFL than when I was with him. Obviously, there was position coaches, and I had a great time with Kyle, all those different things. But he was a guy that just made it so much fun to go to work. And people say, why is that important? And the guys just gave him more because they enjoyed the process, especially like veterans that had been other places. They'd come there, and they would just pour everything into that organization. And I thought, like, that comes from him. And he made specific decisions with coaches that had similar energies and similar passions, and it showed up, point of emphasis for them. And so I felt like the first practice in the morning, watching, again, we're not talking about the senior ball, I'm talking about the coaching here, was way more productive and way more energetic, because the guys were excited to be out on the field and out of practice. And they had done that in 3 days. And I think And I think that's the big difference. This is a kind of coaching style that I think fits the modern player a little bit better. The younger players, I think one of the reasons Pete Carroll was so successful because he adopted this style. I remember talking to Kyle about it as well. He's like, this idea of not making it a total grind to come to work and making it enjoyable, adding some games and some competition, just to kind of make it a little bit more light in the day. Kyle's like, I think that's one of the best things I learned from Dan. And, Kyle's a guy that I think we talk about, kind of with, very respectful tones because of his pedigree and his resume. But for him to be like, this is one thing that I think is so important moving forward, I think just shows you the impact that Dan has on people and that Dan can have on people. So again, it's, I think, to your point, the GM coach division there, I think, is going to be huge, but also I think the energy that Dan's going to bring is going to be really exciting. And, I'm not saying that this is it's done now, everything's fine, everything's perfect. Coaching hires are now the next big thing, and they've always been a big thing. So we'll see how that process goes, but I'm really excited that Dan is here and going to be a part of the Commanders moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the other big difference between why it's not Rivera 2.0, if you will, is I think Quinn has a reputation for bringing accountability in a way that Rivera did not. Ron talked about accountability a lot, but ultimately we saw it play out. Guys like Chase Young never doing what they were supposed to do, and it never got fixed. And, if you talk to enough people in the building, that there was a lot of frustration with that. Some and other players, coaches, whatever, and it never happened. And Logan, I was debating whether we were going to use this clip or not, but I have a clip because I had someone else who played for Dan Quinn on my show yesterday. KJ Wright, Pro Bowl linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks, joined me and talked about what his experience was with Dan. And you're going to hear a lot of what Logan just said at a very different point in Quinn's career. This time, obviously, a younger defensive coordinator when KJ was playing for him, and they went to 2 Super Bowls in Seattle, but also kind of that hard line that he will draw in his own way when necessary.
First off, he's an awesome human being. He's an awesome person, and I love the man. He finds out what you're doing off the field, sees how your family's doing, see what you're going through mentally throughout the season, and so he gets that part of you just being a human being. And then you just go to the football side. The guy is a solid dude. He's a brilliant mind. When you talk about the personalities that we had in Seattle, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, or Michael Bennett, you need a phenomenal leader to lead a bunch of those guys. And he held everyone to a very high standard. As talented and as good as we were, when we did mess up, Dan Quinn was the guy to address it and to make sure that we not slip. And obviously what you saw, we was the most dominating defense for 4 years in a row. And so just an awesome mind. He knows at the right time when to call a certain coverage, when to dial with a certain blitz, and he can see things before they even happen on the football field. That makes for a perfect coordinator. It makes for a perfect coach, where he just puts guys in position to be successful. And so there's not no Ron Rivera 2.0, 2 different personalities at that. And so it's going to be really, really different over there with the Commanders.
So there you go. That's KJ Wright, and he talks about the accountability, but also all that stuff that you talked about. That's so positive. But I think that ability to both be someone's friend, if you will, to have that personal relationship, to treat someone like an adult, but also that treating someone like an adult means telling them when they're wrong and holding them accountable, and ultimately understanding this is a business, and if you're not going to do the job the way that we ask, we'll find someone else who will. That's the NFL, and that's how you succeed in the NFL.
No, I think that's 100% right. And I think he said a lot of great stuff there, and I think just to kind of double click on some of it, his football mind, his football acumen is very, very high. And I think when you look at his evolution as a coach, I think it's very special. There was a period of time where all these guys coming out of Seattle, all these guys from the cover 3 tree, the Seattle 3, the Seattle 6, whatever you want to call that coverage, were really dogmatic about hanging on to it. And when I was in Atlanta near the tail end of his time there, he was like, we need to, I could see it in his eyes, man. We come out to practice, we need to change this. And so then when he goes to Dallas, it's almost a completely different defense. The principles are the same, this bend but don't break, be aggressive in certain spots, find good pass rushers, put those pass rushers in good positions to be successful. But the coverage structures are different. The emphasis is different. And I think it's just, again, to KJ's point, the ability to maximize talent. I think about, Micah Parsons, who's obviously one of the best defensive ends in the NFL, if he's here in Washington last year in kind of this 4 down, just rush the quarterback. I don't know if he gets to 10 sacks. And that's saying a lot because Micah Parsons is a dynamic pass rusher. When you look at what Dan does for him and freeing him up and maximizing the other people in that front, I think it's pretty special. So I definitely think he's a smart football guy. I think the accountability thing is also interesting. It's going to be a little bit different than, like EB. It's not going to be kind of as, aggressive, maybe kind of traditional, but he does a good job of kind of holding you to a standard while also walking that line. So again, it's, there's no perfect coach, but I love Dan. Dan's an excellent human being. That's what KJ said. And I can't reiterate that enough. Like, it is that kind of care and compassion for the players. It gets them to play hard for him. And I think that can't be undervalued. And again, that cultural element, like as a head coach, I think he's going to be doing less X's and O's, but that cultural element is really why you're bringing that guy in here. And I think you're going to get 53 guys who want to come to work and want to be the best versions of themselves. I think that's the other thing that I haven't really said before, but it's like when I was in Atlanta, he was fostering this intense growth with the players. He was encouraging you every day to kind of find something new. And so guys on their own, players on their own would stay after practice and work on stuff independent of coaches. And I thought, like, you don't really see that everywhere. You don't really see that around the NFL. Like, certain guys will do it, but they get a whole position group to stay and be player led. Again, he's a special guy. And again, there's a lot of stuff that still needs to happen in this process to make sure that, the Commanders are successful this year. But yeah, man, I totally agree with the majority of what KJ said.
Yeah, so a couple of questions that I want to tackle here. I want to get to what he does with this roster in a second because I'm pretty intrigued by some of the pieces and how they fit in kind of the traditional Quinn mold. But you talked a month ago when we were talking about Quinn as a candidate about him calling you. That after he got fired in Atlanta, he made many calls, one of which was to you to basically ask, hey, if I do this again, what do I have to do differently? What went wrong in your eyes? He fielded feedback. What feedback did you give him, and what do you think that he heard that he's got to do differently? Because at the end of the day, I can hear fans screaming, listening to stuff, being like, it's great. All this stuff sounds great, but then why was he 43-42? Why was he 0-5 in his last season? Why did he get fired? Like, ultimately, you went to a Super Bowl, which turned into being the biggest blown lead in Super Bowl history. Why am I supposed to get excited about this guy if that's who he is? So how does he change to make it better than it was in Atlanta on the record side of it, which is ultimately the job? All this stuff is good, but the job is to win. And so what gave him, and what do you think others told him to ensure that he's more successful this time around?
Yeah, so I think a couple things there. Like, first off, it's hard to get to the Super Bowl, right? Not a lot of teams do that, so good for him.
To blow a 28-3 lead, you got to be up 28-3 in the Super Bowl, and that's a rare feat.
And you lose to Tom Brady, whatever. That's a tough deal. I also think that, like, there's a couple of factors there. It's not just – I think people, like, they put so much onus on the coach, and we'll get to my advice that I gave him in a second, but, like, they put so much onus on the head coach. But I think when you look at what happened after that 28-3 lead, like, Kyle Shanahan leaves. And I give Dan a ton of credit. He was instrumental in that hire, was a big part of that hire. And in terms of identifying talent, and we've talked about the importance of offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators. And so around the same time, he is relinquishing defensive play calling duty. Kyle leaves. So essentially you're losing 2 coordinators, right? And I think that's a huge effect. I also think, Matt Ryan's getting older. They had just paid Matt Ryan a ton of money. We always quarterback and how you have to you have to invest in that position, but how once you've invested, the roster starts to deteriorate. Also, I think it's interesting that they had some guys that played really, really well in that season. What season was that? Was that 2016, 15, 2015, whatever that was?
Yeah, 15 was the year Ryan won MVP, so 15-16.
Yeah, 15-16.
2016 is when the Super Bowl is.
Yeah, so, they had some guys that played really well that year that regressed hardcore and weren't quite the same players. Like Vic Beasley's a guy that comes to mind. So it's not just Dan in a bubble, I don't think. I think people forget that. You're losing 2 coordinators. You've got this huge kind of albatross of a contract. Matt deserved to get paid. Julio deserved to get paid. But when you pay people like that, it limits who you can bring in to support them. And I think it became really – like, I remember going in – it was such a unique experience going to Atlanta for training camp because they had their – 20 guys that were going to make the team, and everybody else was a rookie. like basically. And so it's hard to win football games like that. And those are personnel decisions. And hopefully, Adam Peters can have the foresight to kind of keep them out of those situations. Like Dimitrov, I love Dimitrov. He was an awesome human being. But again, I think if you were to ask Dimitrov, that's some things he'd like to do differently as well too. And then, I think to my advice now and advice that I've heard other people give him.
Yeah. Real quick, just to put a pause and a pin in that, like that to me is one of the most important things is that, a lot of the stuff, like you look at what happened to Vrabel in Tennessee.
Yeah, it's the
and
same
I think
thing.
there's a lot of similarities to Quinn in Atlanta. And I think Dan had, apart from talking to some folks down in Atlanta, is like Dan had a say in some of those bad decisions on the roster and where some of the investment was made and where he thought maybe he could cover holes. And I think Adam Peters is not going to necessarily, like obviously he will take Dan's input, but we know that it is Peters' show on the personnel side here. And so that automatically takes that off of his plate. And Dan hopefully learns from those mistakes. And if he is faced with similar challenges again, his input's probably going to be a little different. So I look at those things, as long as he has the humility to learn, as positives this time around, even if they were negatives in Atlanta.
Yeah. And I think, and I think to your point, like what have people told him? Like, I think, one of the things that I told him was like, hey, just make sure you got the right people, like in those coordinator spots and at the O-line coaching spots and with the tight end room. Like, make sure those coaches are guys that you trust emphatically to get the job done. Because I felt like I was there in 18, kind of transitioning to 19. I could see him trying to stretch himself too thin to kind of cover all these bases. Because not that he was losing trust, but he just wasn't getting what he needed always from the coordinators, and I think I have a lot of respect for Sark. I have a lot of respect for I forget the guy in 2019, awesome guy, very, very good dude,
Dirk Cutter.
But I think there was a little bit of a drop off, and it was like I could just being around him, I felt like it was slipping away from him. So I said, just make sure that those guys are getting what you want done, and because I think his superpower is building that culture, building relationships. And obviously defensively, he's a really bright dude. But at the time, he wasn't doing that for Atlanta, right? He had kind of shifted into a more managerial role. So I'm like, if you're going to do that, make sure those guys are excellent. And I really believe he's a guy that, and that's another thing, I have the utmost respect for him in this regard. He is always humble and he's always trying to learn. He's always trying to better himself. And so I do think fans are like, well, now we got to hire an offensive coordinator. There's no doubt in my mind that Dan is fully aware of how important that hire is. He understands emphatically how important that is. And so he's going to treat this with the respect that it deserves, I believe. And I think that that's ultimately a good thing to have someone with that kind of awareness. And, I've talked to other people who he was on calls with and just how receptive he was to their feedback as well, I think was also fantastic. So I have confidence that this is going to work better, because he is a guy that is constantly learning and constantly improving himself. And people say, well, that's just words. But I say, look at what happened in Dallas. Look at how he changed. Look at how the defense changed. Look at how he evolved. Look at, what I'm saying? And I think those things are incredibly important just to be aware of. There's a historical context here to his career that is different than the comparison in Ron, I think. And I think that's the thing that really sticks out to me about this hire and about this relationship with Adam Peters that makes this so different. He's learned, he's better, and I think we're going to have a better result here in Washington.
All right, that was Take Command, which you can hear the rest of, including the rest of our conversation about the potential coaching hires. Now it's out. You can check it out whenever you get the chance. Obviously, if you're listening to us, we'd like you to stick with the radio show, but definitely check out Take Command whenever it is that you get the opportunity. As for where we go from here on this radio show, you will hear from Fox Sports' Kevin Burkhardt coming up in the 5 o'clock hour. And we are, of course, live, as you can see, backstage at the Bethesda Theater ahead of 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980 live tonight. So we will have some of our friends stop by as they get here for a couple of thoughts on the air before we turn off all of the transmitting devices and ultimately go off air, on stage, uncensored, coming up starting at 8 p.m. That doesn't really help you if you don't got a ticket. Sold out. We tried to tell you, but look forward to the few hundred of you who did get those tickets and are on their way down here to the Bethesda Theater. Kevin Burkhardt, though, next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. of hour 2 of the Hoffman Show, live from the Bethesda Theater. Of course, on the Team 980, the free Odyssey app, and streaming live on YouTube, where you see Denton Day has joined me here backstage at the Bethesda Theater. And guess what, Denton?
What's that?
Technically, you get to be Not My Beat today.
Hey, I'll take it. I got to cover the directions we could go here, so we got a lot of beats we can cover.
Yeah, we do. Anthony, hit the fancy introduction, please.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
Our interview with Kevin Burkhardt, by the way, coming up at 5:15, so we'll get to that. Then I was able to catch up with Kevin a little bit earlier today. But, Dan, I feel like we could either go like the beat of like Dan Quinn, coaching hirings, college football, quarterback stuff, anybody in the draft you like on the defense. Like, there's so many different ways. Or we could just do a full, like, what's going to happen
What's
right
over
there.
here? What should we expect if you're coming? It's sold out, by the way.
It's sold out, which I feel bad then talking about it on air because either people are really excited or they're not going to be able to come.
I mean, maybe people will be scalping tickets outside. Can you imagine someone just standing on the corner of Wisconsin Avenue, be like, I got 2 to 106.7 versus the Team 980. Come get them.
Yeah, I mean, you might have just given someone an idea. The market demands are what they are. We were getting like a group text earlier from the boss about there's some people like had some extra tickets all of a sudden, and he walked by and I was like, can we raffle them off? And he was like, no. And I was like,
it'd be fun though.
Man.
It'd be a great interaction.
Come on. To do it like we do our fantasy football league at the beginning of the year. You call in, you tell me why you deserve the tickets. That's apparently not been shot down. I'm sorry. We'll see what shenanigans happen. You just get to sit back and watch the carnage.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's going to be fun, though. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun, and I think once people get a little bit of liquid courage in them, you'll start to see a side of some of your favorite hosts and some of your favorite personalities that you have not seen before. And Danny Rudy is going to be doing comedy. So I think
Danny's going to open with a roast.
Which I can't wait.
Which is like kind of, it's funny because like I feel like with a lot of our hosts, there's a lot of material that is very self-evident.
I don't think it took him long to come up with some jokes.
Yeah. I kind of wonder with me because Danny's got a couple things that he rips me for on occasion, and I'm like, I don't know what direction he's going to go, and honestly, that terrifies me.
I don't know if I'm going to be a part of it, but he did.
I was told producers are not.
Yeah, so we're off limits. Yeah. But his joke with me was always when I used to do updates. I did updates for Grant and Daniel like once because I was usually a morning guy. They're like, hey, you'll wake up at 3 a.m., come do it.
Right.
But it was just the way that I introduced myself. So it's been a joke for a year that every time he sees me, he introduces myself like I was doing an update because apparently to him it sounded funny.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm like, all right, cool.
I think a comedian, they latch on to one thing.
Yeah.
Mine's going to be something about fitness, whatever.
Fitness or something.
That's, it is what it is, which I'm going to then give into because so Den and I were talking in the break. I'm doing this terrible event that's going to be very fun called High Rocks in March, and we have like a big workout prep. Like our sim tomorrow morning, so I'm probably not going to drink, which feels like that is like – there is a level of risk in that of being on that stage sober.
Being the only person that's out there sober.
Realizing what is happening up there, feeling some sense of responsibility and or shame. So we'll see how that goes. Or I'll just be like, somebody get me
give me something immediately.
Yeah,
I need something.
I need a drink. What do you want? I don't care. Give me one.
Yeah, give me something here, and this will go by so much quicker.
Yeah. So excited for that. Doors at 8 o'clock tonight if you are doors 6:30 tonight if you're on the way. Down, everything should get started around 8, but plenty of time to grab food, grab a drink, whatever it is, before Danny kicks us off here at the Bethesda Theater. Okay, let's talk about Dan Quinn, though, because that's what most of the radio audience is actually interested in. It sounds like from talking to you in the break and listening to you and Kevin the last couple of days, like you kind of are where I am on this, which is like this is a good hire. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff that has to go right. But I think the thing that separates where I'm at, not necessarily from where you are, but from where a lot of other folks who aren't excited seem to be is like all the stuff that's true with Dan Quinn was true with everybody else too.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that's getting lost here is like, well, he's got to hire a great offensive coordinator. And I'm like, so would Mike McDonald. And by the way, so would Ben Johnson, because otherwise he's going to fail as a head coach. Like that's just the nature of it.
Right. That's the nature of the beast. And I will admit that maybe the initial – when it was, all right, Dan Quinn's likely going to be the guy, that might have been initially underwhelming. But as you learn more about the process that the leadership for this team went through, you start to understand he was never, like, the last guy on the list. Everyone's like, this is Jim Zorn all over again, and it is not. I think people forget what the Jim Zorn process was actually like, right? Because it was like we hired this dude as offensive coordinator, and then in the middle of the night, we can't get anybody else. All right, we'll just give him the head coaching. This was not that at all. They interviewed everybody. Ben Johnson apparently wasn't the greatest interview from the jump, and it's very clear. Look, I mean, like, we've all done hard things in life, right? We've all broken up with people. If you do it via text versus in person, that's whack, right? So imagine doing an interview process, pulling out, not actually telling them while they're en route to you, and you decide I'm not there. So that when I heard that he wasn't a great interview, and then we knew how he pulled out, that all made sense all of a sudden, right? And I think what Dan Quinn is going to do is he is a terrific leader, right? But all of his dudes that he's ever coached love him, all of them. Like we're in an era where player empowerment is greater than ever, right? Everybody has a podcast, and it's great. There's a lot of stories that are coming out about a lot of coaches that we kind of thought, but we never really knew. No one has ever said anything bad about Dan Quinn. And that to me is very, very telling. So, yeah, he has to nail the offensive coordinator, but duh, like, welcome to the NFL.
Right. And as I said, the offensive coordinator turned head coaches also have to hire a great OC to buttress them so that they can continue to have play calling responsibilities, but put together a good game plan during the week. Nevertheless, a good defensive coordinator, obviously. One of the OC names that has come up that I think is particularly good to ask you about, Mr. Late Night College Football Man. For those that don't know, Denton also doing great work at SiriusXM and their college football stuff, and you had the late show.
Yeah.
So you watched plenty of the Pac-12.
Right.
Chip Kelly, UCLA. What he does out there and what you think he could be as an NFL offensive coordinator, a position he's never had, by the way.
Yes.
He was an NFL head coach for 4 years, 3 in Philly, 1 in San Francisco. What do you make of Chip as an OC candidate?
If you were just taking his mind for offense, I'd be thrilled. Because I think he's a guy that is really good at adapting to his situation. You got to do that in college because, especially now, guys are in, they're out. You have to be really good at adapting your situation. So if it was just hiring the offensive mind of Chip Kelly, I'd be all for it. We should do it yesterday. But there is the person, too. And what Chip Kelly's biggest downfall was in the NFL is that he tried to coach an NFL team like a college coach, where college coaches have all the power. They dictate when you wake up, what you eat, when you go to class. They dictate everything, and you can't do that in the NFL. These are grown men. These are grown professionals. So, yes, he would not be the head coach, so he would not be in a position theoretically where he could be dictating everything. But I do wonder how that transition will be on the person of Chip Kelly going from being a head coach in college to the NFL, going back to college, and now taking a position where you do not have the final say on everything. That's a very tough thing to do, and it's not like he was forced into that, right? Like there's certain guys where you're not a head coach anymore. It's just you failed enough to where you're not a head coach anymore. You have to accept this reality. But I think if he is choosing to do that, I do wonder if he actually is fully grasping what he would be walking into. So that makes me a little nervous as far as Chip Kelly goes. And we've seen him bolt before, right? It's like we've seen him bolt. And I think there are other guys that would be available that are really, really good that you would not have to worry about bolting immediately if something better came up.
So I don't disagree with you on a lot of what you just said, and especially the last thing, that there are other candidates that I like more. But I do think that Chip is interesting in that San Francisco, like his reputation in San Francisco was much better than it was in Philly.
Yes.
Some of that stuff that he tried in Philly, he went to San Francisco and was like, okay, I understand.
Right.
Like I do think he learned from that experience. He also went 2-14 because that roster was poopsy.
It was terrible.
I was looking at it earlier today.
It was a bad roster.
It was a bad football team. So that reality is what it is. And you know, do you want a guy whose last stop in the NFL was 2-14 as a head coach? I mean, and it was also a long time ago. Like that was 2014, I think.
It was around. I think it was 2016. It was before Shanahan.
Yeah, it was 2016. You're
but
right.
I do recognize. So, like, one of the things that I'm excited about Dan Quinn is that he's been in this position before, and he has an opportunity to learn from the mistakes. So I recognize that kind of bashing Chip Kelly for his mistakes is a little hypocritical, but that my biggest concern is just that, because Dan Quinn's mistakes felt like they were less ruling with an iron fist and things just didn't go right. So I'm a little skeptical about Chip Kelly. But as you said, like I do think there are there are better options that maybe aren't as flashy. Maybe it would actually get some people riled up in a negative way, but I think there are better options out there.
I need my guy Teresh to tweet me, which inevitably he will, because he's always listening, and he is the king of connections. Resh Manuel on Twitter. I'm sure you follow. Like, I also wonder about the tree thing. You know, you get someone from the Kyle, the Sean, that tree. There's going to be other options. If you do ultimately have the success that we hope that they have in Klint Kubiak or Brian Greasy or whoever.
So who is your number one? Do you have a number one?
I don't particularly. I mean, I'm very intrigued by Klint Kubiak, 36 years old, and he's in the exact role that McDaniel and Slowick have been in.
Yes.
Like, the guys that have done that job for Kyle Shanahan know how to then go to the next job and do really well.
Right.
And I think the familiarity of Dan and Kyle, I think clearly whatever that position sets you up for, and the long term, like, and also I think that offense is good for young quarterbacks, right?
Yes.
Like, if you hey, we're going to run the mess out of the ball until you react to it, and then we're going to hit you with a bunch of great play action stuff, like, that's appealing. And they've also, I think people from that tree have been able to adapt that offense to personnel, whether it's the speed in Miami that McDaniels has done, C.J. Stroud's strengths and some of the very specific receiver strengths in Houston, and, by the way, hiding a bad O-line kind of in both places.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things to like about that scheme, which is why it's now run by, 70% of the league.
I'm intrigued by Klint Kubiak, but I will say one of the guys that I have found myself gravitating back towards is Frank Reich, because I think he got a raw deal in Carolina. Like, I wouldn't want to coach in Carolina. Like, I wish the best for Canales. I mean, that's going to be a tough spot to be in just because of the owner. But you look at what he's done with quarterbacks, and I do think there is an element, and maybe this is going to come off negative, but I don't know if he's going to be in the running for a head coaching job again. So you don't run the risk of having a good offense for a couple years or even just a year, and then he gets poached. So I think if you're in the process that the team is going to be in, where you're going to build ideally for the next couple of years, and with a quarterback that is likely either going to be Drake May or Jaden Daniels. I mean, maybe some crazy happens and Caleb Williams is available. But, like, I think a guy like Frank Reich, if it is Drake May, I mean, I think he's over the moon with a guy like him.
I don't know enough about Reich's personality. I mean, it seems like Dan Quinn can get along with anybody. That seems to be the thing. I don't know about Reich's personality. And
he's
how
a
that
football
works.
dude. I've met him before. He's a football dude.
He's a Terp, which would be fun. You'd have a Salisbury guy and a Maryland guy running the Commanders, so that would certainly make the state of Maryland very happy. He's interesting because, like, for as horrible as Carson Wentz was here, and he wasn't exactly great in Indy, they did find a way to go 9-4 or whatever it was down the stretch with him. Like, it was crazy.
I think they might have had 11 wins.
Yeah, like, so that was Carson Wentz's last serviceable year in the NFL.
Oh, you're talking Indy. I thought you meant the year in Philly where he nearly won MVP when Reich was his OC.
that was pre-injury.
Yeah.
Wentz,
you're right.
Reich has a huge part in that. That's kind of his claim to fame.
Right.
But yeah, I mean,
because this dude got a statue of Nick Foles erected in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's on the top of the resume, because God bless Nick Foles, but, like, he got $88 million because of that one playoff run and never really accounted for much after that.
Dude's out of the league, which is nuts because that Super Bowl wasn't that long ago. Denton Day, you can hear him obviously with Kevin Sheehan weekdays 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Appreciate you stopping by, sir.
Absolutely. Hope to see everybody out there, and it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, it will be. And next, you'll hear my conversation with Fox Sports lead play-by-play man, Kevin Burkhardt. He's called more Cowboys games than anyone, so I was like, that's a good guess. Let's get Kevin. You'll hear my chat with Burkhardt next. Odyssey app and, of course, streaming on YouTube at the Team 980. And right now, it is our pleasure to welcome in the man who has called more Dallas Cowboys games on television than anyone else. Well, Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator there. It is Fox Sports play-by-play ace Kevin Burkhardt. Kevin, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for your time.
Craig, good to be back, buddy. All good, my friend.
Yeah, it is. It's a fun time here in DC. Obviously, it's not maybe the sexy hire, the young hotshot guy, but Dan Quinn, super solid. You've gotten to talk to him so much over the last 3 years. I say Dan Quinn to you. What immediately comes to mind?
Well, I think it's a great hire, and I know, Ben Johnson was linked for a long time, and I'm sure Commanders fans think, okay, great, get the offensive coordinator, figure out the quarterback and go from there. But I think Dan Quinn's perfect for Washington for a number of reasons. I think he's an unreal culture builder and leader of men. I mean, anyone that's ever played for him, coached under him, there's so many coaches in the league that, love him, a la, LaFleur, Shanahan, McDaniel, guys that just credit a lot of their success to him coaching under him. And then the players just run through a wall for him, right? So just in terms of a culture builder and a leader of men, and I think they need a whole culture redo there, right? And I think that's what Josh Harris and the new ownership's trying to do. Just kind of start over, and start from square one, right? So I think DQ is a perfect guy to do that. And then I think for me, when you look at Washington last year, the most disappointing thing was their defense. I mean, they've got good players on their defense, and they were atrocious in a lot of areas last year. And I don't know that a lot of people saw that coming. I think people thought they would struggle a little bit on offense, but the defense would keep them in a lot of games. Well, it really didn't. And I think if you want a guy to fix that, well, his defenses in Dallas were great every single year. And I know, the latest rendition example is the wild card game against Green Bay. They got torn up. So that's tough if you're a Washington fan. You're just looking at that. But look at the body of work. His time in Dallas, look at the body of work, his defenses, and I think he grew so much as a defensive coordinator in Dallas than he had been in Atlanta and Seattle. He's told us that many times. He's added so many different things to his repertoire. So I think you look at all that, I think it's really the perfect hire for them. Now they just got to figure out who's going to be the offense coordinator, who's going to be the quarterback next year.
Yeah, small little things that every NFL team doesn't struggle with for decades.
Yeah, exactly.
Just ask, this team or the Chicago Bears or on down the list. Things go. You talk about the things that he's learned, the way he's adapted. I think there's very basic things that most football fans understand. Like he ran that cover 3 basically exclusively in Seattle, and they were the best defense in football 2 years running with him as the DC there. He now runs a bunch of different coverage structures and mixes it up. But, since you guys talked to him about it, what are some of the things he learned? And maybe even if there were any points in those discussions where he talked about like, hey, if I'm ever the head guy again, I definitely do this differently than he did in Atlanta, and how that evolution happened over the last, let's say, decade since he left Seattle.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that, yes, that you're exactly right. That was the system in Seattle, and he carried that over basically to Atlanta. Well, then then you think about that, where they were predominantly zone, and they played the most man in the NFL this year, right? And the reason is because he adapted to his personnel. You know, they had guys that played man very, very well, and they had three big safeties who can run and cover tight ends and versatile. They had a lot of versatile players, like these hybrid, you know, quasi linebacker safety guys that were able to do a lot of different things with them. He figured out how to use them all in ways that got the most out of them, you know, with Hooker and Kurse and Donovan Wilson. I thought it was awesome what he did with them. So I think just that alone, his ability to change and adapt to personnel, his ability this year to move around Micah Parsons more than anything else. And people say, okay, well, that's easy. You move Micah Parsons from one side to the middle. But what you don't realize is that affects the whole rest of the defense, right? When he moves, there's got to be communication with everybody else to account for where he's not. So I just think those are two examples I give about things that he has done to change and how he's adapted. And to me, that's the number one thing. But I think in a head coach, look, in today's NFL, you're obviously a lot of the time looking for an offensive play caller, because then you don't lose the play caller, right? The play caller stays as head coach. You're not going to lose him in a year or two to a head coaching job. But I think the number one thing is you got to have a leader of men. You know, and I look at DeMeco Ryans this year in Houston. A big reason why they won, he was so revered as a player, and certainly as a, you know, staff member and then defensive coordinator of 49ers, as a leader of men, as a guy that controlled the room. And I think that's what you're looking for. I don't think there's anybody better than building a culture than Dan. I don't. So I really like that for Washington for that hire.
Kevin Burkhardt, Fox Sports, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So, Kevin, I will now do the thing that I've done to basically everyone who says what you just said, and ask a question on behalf of the fan base. I've certainly given my answer, but culture builder, yada, yada, that stuff sounds a lot like what Ron Rivera was supposed to be. When you look at DQ, why do you think it's going to be different for DQ than it was for Rivera, for any reason that you see fit?
Well, I think the biggest reason is because they've got a completely different hierarchy, right? New ownership group, and then, you know, a lot of new parts in the front office. And Adam Peters is a guy who is ultra respected around the league, and I think he's really smart. You know, he worked well with John Lynch in San Francisco, and I know he thought highly of him. And I think you have to have that working together scenario where the front office and the head coach are, you know, in step. I think San Francisco is the model, right? That's the model where you have a GM and a coach who are tight, who get along, who make decisions together, but they don't interfere in one another's business. There's still like kind of a separation there. They work together on everything, but there's still like, you know, John's a GM, Kyle's a coach. There's no overlapping. Well, I think when Ron was there was nothing but overlapping and everything else that, you know, I don't think it was ever a clean operation. So that's the difference. And I think it could be potentially a huge difference.
No, I totally agree. I am curious real quick, since you do spend an inordinate amount of time with Greg Olson, and you guys did cover a number of Washington games, even if it was mostly when they were playing Dallas, because that's what your bosses like to do, is send you guys to Dallas Cowboys games. You know, when you would talk to Greg about what went wrong here and what needed to change here, because he knows Ron so well, having been a part of the best years of Carolina's run with him, like, what were those conversations like, as much as you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak for Greg, who loves Ron Rivera, right? I mean, he's got the utmost respect for Ron Rivera, and, you know, playing for him and winning a lot of games for him and going to the Super Bowl with him. So I know as a man, he loves him. I know as a head coach, you know, he loves him as well. And I think, look, you could cite a lot of things of what did happen or didn't happen, but the reality is you got to win. And the reality is they didn't find a quarterback. That's it. I mean, I think there's a lot of things, but I think if you're going to narrow it down, Craig, I don't – show me the head coach that has won consistently without a quarterback. And, you know, you can make the case, okay, you say, well, Kyle Shanahan's had a little bit of rotation out there, right? He figured out a way to win. Okay, you can make that argument, but Jimmy G was pretty good for them, and Brock Purdy's been excellent for them. Just show me the coach. I don't know who that is. And the reality is, since they moved on from Kirk Cousins, they haven't figured it out. And so until they do, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a huge part of it. And I think, like you said earlier too, the setup was just so bad, and like the culture, like the idea that Ron could change the culture never worked because Ron was doing a million things other than being a football coach. And now Dan Quinn just gets to be a football coach because Adam's in charge and you have a better leadership structure from the top. I think all of those things, there were endless problems, Kevin. We saw what happened here.
Yeah.
There's problems for days and weeks and months.
It's gone on for a long time, right? But that's the hope with the new ownership group and some new pieces in the front office and leadership by Adam and Dan, right? The hope is it's going to be different. And look, by the way, on the quarterback thing, I'm not saying Sam Howell can't be the guy, and maybe they draft a guy at 2, maybe they stick with Sam. I thought that he was put in a tough position, and they threw the ball a million times with him last year. He didn't have a lot of help. I thought he did some really good things, and he's got some talent. I like Sam. So I'm not saying that they don't have the quarterback now. I'm just saying that the structure that was there, along with the rotation of quarterbacks, and they had a bunch, as you know, it's just got to be better. They have to figure that part out. And, I think they all know that. But I just will say, I understand what fans are, they're looking for the light switch in Washington to turn it on because it's an unbelievable fan base that's been dormant. They haven't had a lot to cheer about in a long, long time. But I do like what they've done this offseason. Like, let's start there, and we'll see where it goes. But at least right now, I'm on board with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's so hard to try to make sense of what that roster was last year because, again, coaching staff, environment, etc. And that's going to be Adam Peters and Dan Quinn's job to sort through it all, see what they have. Last thing I want to ask you, though, on the way out is Kevin Burkhardt, play-by-play for Fox Sports, is our guest, is what does this do for Dallas? Because obviously that's an in-division opponent 2 times a year. Going to see them. Mike McCarthy now, like, he's on the weirdest hot seat you see in professional sports, which is, hey, dude, you've won 12 games, 3 straight years. Excellent job. Do it again and do better, or you're going to get fired. He's now got to replace his defensive coordinator, and it looks like DQ might be bringing some of his top lieutenants here to DC. Where does this leave the Cowboys going into next year?
Well, it's going to be a tough guy to replace, right? But I'll be curious to see if they stay in-house or if they go, outside. I think, Greg Olson said this on the playoff game. I think they were right. I agree with Greg. I think they were right to keep Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott had the best year of his career. I don't think it was an accident. Mike McCarthy knows how to coach quarterbacks. And offensively, they were fantastic this year. They laid an egg in the playoff game. Like, that's on everybody, right? Of course, the head coach gets some of the blame, but I always think, who are you going to do to be better? Who's going to be better? If you get rid of him or if you change quarterbacks or whatever it is, that's fine. Who's going to be better? So I think it was smart they brought back Mike McCarthy. And now to replace DQ, yeah, I think that'll be interesting. It's been a good pairing. They've really worked well together. They've got a lot of respect for each other. And that defense, I think a big part of that defense, when Cowboys with that explosive offense would get the lead, they would kind of unleash the D. The thing where the D, sometimes last year when they got behind, they had trouble stopping the run because they didn't really have the personnel to stop it. A lot of those hybrid players, they didn't have like the big linebackers or the super big interior linemen to get that done. So I'm curious. Look, I think if they stay in-house, they've got some really good candidates. Maybe it's an Al Harris, who's their secondary coach, who's done some great things, obviously, with the secondary. I know Mike Zimmer came out yesterday and said he'd be interested in that job. That's a really interesting option considering, which I think could work with their personnel. So I think they've got a lot of options, but I think it'll be different. And I think they may try to approach it a little bit differently. But I don't think it'll be easy. Dan did an amazing job there. That's why he's got another head coaching job.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, Kevin Burkhardt, Fox Sports. You see him on the lead game every single week of the NFL season. KB, hopefully we get a chance to run into each other next week in Vegas. I know you got so much going on, but regardless of whether I get to see you in person or not, always appreciate your time on the show, and hopefully nice and easy travels for you, and we'll see you out there.
Craig, good to catch up, man. Be well. Talk soon.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980 live on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980, where if you're watching, ladies and gentlemen, it's Chris Russell joining me backstage here live at the Bethesda Theater.
Hello, Craig Hoffman. How are you?
I'm good. That was a little bit of like a pageant wave that you did.
It's weird, like with all these, I've never been on TV before, so I have no idea what it's like to be on camera.
You're on TV every week on DC News Now.
Yeah, but it's through my computer. I've been on TV before,
You've
so
done
I
TV.
should know. But this is a weird contraption setup that you have. You do it big time. I'm just a measly little radio show, in middays. You break out the studio lights. You got the donut lights, whatever these things are called.
They're called ring lights.
Yeah, ring lights. You got rods all over the place. You got fancy schmancy little buttons over here. I am nothing. I am, as Doug Williams once said, I am small potatoes. I don't think he said that about a good thing, but
I don't know that was a Doug Williams phrase.
It was.
He was the first guy ever in the history of the world to say that's small
well,
potatoes.
it's the one that I could think of at that point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yet we do all this stuff, and the boss man loves to remind me, we pay you to do a radio show.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the people driving in the cars.
Hi, radio people.
Yeah, we
How are you?
We love. I love all of you equally. I can't speak for anybody else.
I love them too. Anybody that listens to me rant and rave for 3 hours, certainly, and anybody that listens to the radio station, I'm very thankful for, very appreciative, and we look forward to seeing some of you out here tonight.
Yes, indeed. What scares you the most about this event tonight? What excites you the most about this event tonight?
Well, listen, if you go into it, if you're me, a loudmouth, obnoxious fool sometimes, if you go into this thinking you're not going to get shredded and diced up like, I don't know.
The Commanders' defense in 2023?
That's a good comparison. 31st in the league, 32nd in the league, depending on what statistical category we're talking about. Yeah, if you go into this thinking it's not going to be that way and everybody's going to be nice and everything's going to be great and, Rooster, we love you and you're perfect and you're this and you're that and you're just a lovable guy. If you go into it thinking like that, you're going to probably walk away, if you're me, sorely disappointed. So I've taken the approach of I'm excited for the event. Number one, I think it's a really cool idea. Both stations getting together on stage, all that, having some fun. Everybody can relax and have some drinks and do it responsibly and all that. Great little setup that we have.
Notoriously what everybody on that stage is known for.
Exactly. But it's a great setup that they have here at the Bethesda Theater. It looks really awesome with the tables and the chair, whatever. So everybody's going to have a good time. But I know going into this thing, I'm going to get shredded like mozzarella. I know that I'm going to walk away feeling less of myself. I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
Considering where your self-esteem is at all times, as you're just like, me, the loudmouth, obnoxious guy that nobody likes. Let me tell you, Chris, I don't know. I'm a little scared about that. I'm going to have to stand up for you.
You're not that worried, right? Because nobody makes that much fun of you, do they?
That's the thing. Is I wonder if I just wind up catching some grenades because people look at it as their shot.
No, I think I'm going to catch the grenades. I think you're going to catch the shrapnel. How about that?
Probably. The other thing that what was I going to say? This is here's good material for people. Here's what I was going to ask. So, when they do the presidential debates, what they will do is they will have, because that's kind of what the setup reminds me of, is there's 11 chairs out there with microphones, and everyone's going to want to get their takes off because none of us have any ego at all.
Yeah.
And so they do the count of the mic time of this person spoke for X. Who leads the stage in mic time? Who comes in last?
I think if I had to guess, I would say Johnny Cakes Allville from the Junkies leads because if you remember at the Burgundy and Sold event at the bullpen, the day that Josh Harris officially took over, he was kind of like the lead star, the lead MC, what have you, and a couple of us contributed and whatever.
Yeah.
So I would guess that he's probably going to have the most time. Now, I've seen the rundown.
Yeah.
I know that I know that you and Grant and Danny and whatever are doing different things. I'm not listed. So it's either CK saying, screw that guy, or he's going to talk so much even though he's not on the rundown that we're not going to give him any extra time.
Well, so I get to play point guard for one of the sessions where where I'm leading our Super Bowl 58 discussion. So that'll be fun. So I know at the very least that I will set other people up for that.
I'm game if you want to talk Super Bowl 58.
We'll make a deal right now.
Okay.
If you haven't said a word by the time that I get to
what are the chances of that?
Throw a pass. I'll be like, hey, Russell.
That's like halfway into the show, if I remember correctly, or something like that.
Yeah.
What are the chances
that
I haven't said a word?
To be small. To be fair,
small potatoes.
Yeah, there is a nice chunk of that where John Allen is going to be a featured star.
That is fair. You know what I'm not going to be doing? Talking when John Allen is talking, because he can eat all of us for lunch or dinner. I mean, I'm not doing that. I'm not interrupting him.
No, I think part of what makes you good at these jobs is you have to understand what your audience is after. And for as much as they're coming to an event for our radio stations, and clearly we have a lot of our biggest fans, and we're very grateful for the support, they'd probably rather hear from John Allen.
Absolutely. And, listen, I know it was a disappointing year for the football club. I know it was a really disappointing team. Year for the defense, but Jonathan Allen, I don't know if he's going to stay here or not. The contract
I think that will probably come up tonight.
Yeah, the contract is somewhat tradable. I don't know if it's fully tradable. Kind of depends on your perspective, but the way I look at this, and of course, we'll segue into Dan Quinn is, and I don't know if you disagree. I mean, I've heard bits and pieces of your show since Dan Quinn has taken over. When in lieu of right now having that stud outside pass rushing linebacker, or quite honestly, even that stud 4-3 defensive end, which they traded away in Montez Sweat and or Chase Young, Montez more than Chase.
Yeah.
Of course, they will add to that in free agency and the draft. We all understand that. But in lieu of that right now, what I think might mostly prevent a Jonathan Allen trade, and of course Deron Payne I don't think is going anywhere, is the fact that those two are your bulldogs. Those two are your horses to get a pass rush going, and obviously and I think you mentioned yesterday, I thought this was a really good point, if I just point that out, and I'm sure you don't mind a compliment.
Thank you.
Using Deron Payne as a down defensive end, I think is something that I hadn't quite thought of. But if you look at Dan Quinn, what is he like? Look, Micah Parsons is a tremendous athlete.
Instead of trying to squeeze this into like 30 seconds here, let's we had fun talking about this.
Yes.
Let's talk ball next.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No, you're good. Because of obviously all the consternation about the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been so much talk about that, and Quinn hired, and he's got to do this. Let's actually talk some football next. And plus, let's be honest. When we get out there later, they're not going to let us talk actual football. No. It's going to be
not those silly
chaos.
980 guys.
I just meant football in general. Maybe that's going to be my aim with John. Is big. John, can I ask you a football question? Russell and I are going to actually talk some X's and O's and what we've seen from Dan Quinn and how it fits what's left of this roster next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. We're live from the Bethesda Theater, also streaming live on YouTube.
especially the junkies.
7:45.
Yeah,
at least.
So. Like I'm only here because we had nowhere else to go. Matt and I were going to go for a happy hour, but we couldn't.
It was too cold outside.
We couldn't figure out the parking lot. It was weird. We couldn't figure out how to get in the building. That was weird. It took us a while to get through the credentialing process and very popular stuff, right? Very tight, secured entry. And then we were like, or I was like, it's like 5:25. The bar's like 4 blocks away. Happy hour ends at 6. What are we going to subject ourselves to the cold? And then we come back here, and it's like Nanook in the north back here.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's pretty chilly back here.
Yeah.
The jacket is definitely staying on.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I had another one, but it's fine. I'll probably take a lap after
just
this.
start working out, Hoffman. That's
my,
what you're,
warm my hands up.
Yeah, I mean, just start working out.
I did enough working out today, and I got a beast of a one tomorrow.
I didn't do
ugly.
enough working out today. My workout was walking up and down a couple of flights of stairs and from the parking garage over to here.
Some days that's what it is.
Yeah.
Some days that's what it is.
hear it.
Okay, let's talk some football. You look at what Dan Quinn has done in his career. He has been a guy who has been adaptable. He's adapted to kind of what offenses are doing. Obviously, his cover 3 system in Seattle was one that was the dominant force in the league for a while. Teams figured out how to beat it or how to put it in conflict. He goes to Atlanta. Eventually, he's like, we got to tweak this thing. He makes the tweaks in Dallas. They're great on defense. You look at what he's done, some of the things that are through lines, the principles, and this roster, which is going to look very different, but there are some pieces that we imagine will be here. Early thoughts on the fit. It really, because like they can remake the team over time.
Right.
But when we look at 2024, early thoughts.
So what I'm fascinated by, right? I mean, we all expect it to be a 4-3, right?
Yes.
I mean, let's start there. What I'm fascinated by is he played a lot of man in Dallas, right? You mentioned the cover 3 with the Legion of Boom, and sure, but that was an aggressive cover 3. That wasn't a, off man, like they were in people's face at the line of scrimmage, right? So I just assume we're going to see a blend of things, but I would think that you're going to probably see more of what he ran in Dallas, depending on the personnel. Like if Kendall Fuller is re-signed, you probably shouldn't run more man, right? If I guess and Emmanuel Forbes was drafted to be a zone corner, right, with his eyes, and so right now you would think, okay, wait a second, zone fits, but Kendall Fuller may not be back. So if Kendall Fuller's not be back, who I don't think you can play man with him consistently, can you convert? Again, Emmanuel Forbes into more of a man corner. Can you get something out of Christian Holmes, who was a man corner at Oklahoma State when he was drafted? Can you? Who's the other guy that I'm thinking about? Benjamin St. Just, who was more
wild card in all of
right,
this.
but he was more of a man press guy at Minnesota, right? I remember talking to his former defensive coordinator, and obviously in the tape. So I'm curious to find. I think what kind of primary, and maybe you have a different opinion, and obviously you watch way more tape than I do. I'm kind of curious to see what happens with Kendall Fuller, and that'll be maybe an indicator if Dan doesn't come out and say what kind of coverage we're going to see more of on the back end.
Which, to be clear, he won't.
Yes.
Why would you give that away before the season?
Fair.
Maybe there's going to be. I think there's probably going to start with a mix, and then over time they adapt and evolve. But you would agree with that in general? Yeah, no,
or?
I think Fuller could be a bit of an indicator,
Yeah.
but also Kendall might just want to go somewhere else.
Right,
I think
right.
Kendall's probably enjoyed both of his stints here. I think this does feel like home for him, but if he wants to win another ring, with where he is age-wise, getting in his late 20s, he's probably going to wind up going somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point. Forbes is fascinating because he was so poorly coached last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like what can real NFL defensive backs coaches do with him? And God forbid, Benjamin St. Just finally developed some ball skills. And I think he to me is the biggest wild card because 2 years ago, and even early at times last year, he's in position all the time to make plays. And he just is so incapable of finishing them. And it's really frustrating for everyone, including Benjamin. And it's always been who he's been. It's who he was at Michigan, Minnesota, and then every year in Washington. If they can work with him on that, and by the way, Dan Quinn's Dallas defense is the most ball-hawking defense that there was the last couple of years. Diggs a couple of years ago, Deron Bland this past year, he becomes a really fascinating piece.
Really fascinating. And I think I don't know how you feel about this. I can't remember what you guys said during the season, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't want him in the slot. I
don't mind him in the slot,
Okay.
actually. He's actually showed
Because of his size
all
and-
right. Well, he's got this combination of size and feet that is just rare.
It's not that he's bad. I think for me, his skill set translates more to outside. But
Traditionally,
Yeah.
but I think the how do I want to put this? The profile, that's actually the right word. The profile of a slot receiver has changed. Like
That's
slot
true.
receivers
That's true.
used to
You're right.
always look like
You're right.
Santana Moss.
You're right.
And now all of a sudden you got like
you're right.
Do you
You're
have
right.
Jackson Smith and Jigba?
Yeah.
Sure, but you've
Yeah.
also got CeeDee Lamb who lines up in the slot all the time.
Well, and just to that point, right? Even when you don't have a bigger natural slot receiver, teams say when they're game planning, and of course this makes sense, is they'll take a 6'3", 220-pound receiver, or maybe even a bigger receiver than that, and say, okay, because I know that team plays with a smaller, thinner nickel, I'm going to take advantage of that matchup as opposed to, so you could do different things. The whole genesis of the point is, I think, I don't want to speak for you, is Dan Quinn has shown an adaptability through the years, like you said, cover 3, aggressive at the line of scrimmage, though, with it, not just playing off-man coverage or anything like that, or off coverage, I should say, then kind of a mix of everything in Atlanta, and then kind of, more man and more, I guess, aggressive, if you will, in Dallas. And we all know the ball hawk skills and all that stuff. I'm so intrigued to see how it's going to ultimately look, but I don't know if we know how it's going to look until we get the personnel to see,
course.
okay, what they're planning.
And look, let's be clear, that could be years away.
Yeah.
Like, I say
No,
years,
you're right.
not 7, like 1
Right.
to 2. But I will say the thing that excites me about Quinn on a principle level is he marries rushing coverage as well as any DC in the league. And part of the reason that those corners in Dallas get all those picks is because they know the rush is going to get home. He generates pressure. And don't forget, Dan Quinn was a D-line coach. That's his background.
No, you're right.
And so he knows how to use the pieces, which is why, like, I mean, there is, I want to say there's not an amount of money I wouldn't pay for Brian Burns to try to get him out of Carolina. But with all that, with the league-leading amount of cap space, I'm not getting outbid for Brian Burns. Like,
well, here's the thing that I was thinking about.
He's probably going to get franchise tag.
Yeah, I was going to say, right.
Which I would not trade a bunch of
Right.
stuff for him. But,
Right.
like, there's a couple of guys where I'd be like, how do I get my hands on that guy? And it's frustrating that Sweat could be a phenomenal player for them here, but, and it's a thin edge class. But it is something that's going to, I think, be fascinating. I think the other really interesting football thing, and I've said this a couple times, so I can get a quick reaction from you so I don't bore my audience with the same point for the 7th time in 2 days, but that Dallas defense was super light through the middle, and that was kind of their Achilles heel. He's inheriting John, Duran, and Jamin.
Yeah.
That is a thick spine to your defense.
Right.
And we'll see, obviously, if Cam Curl is
Sure.
re-signed as well.
Sure.
I think that's going to be the most fascinating thing. Like, the back end, interesting. The front 7, how he chooses to build and attack that, I think is the key to the whole thing.
No, it's a great point, absolutely. And I hadn't really talked about the point. The one thing I would ask you then is if you're looking at this defense right now, besides the obvious, again, making decisions on Fuller and Cam Curl, and maybe your philosophy, is Mike like a true Mike linebacker, or is it a true edge rusher, whatever we define that is, whether it's a 4-3 end or, a chameleon-type guy like Micah Parsons turned out to be, or I guess an outside linebacker in the 4-3. Like, what is the most important one-piece cornerstone element that this team has to add right now, this offseason?
That's a great question, because I'm thinking back. The best player on the Seattle defense was probably Earl Thomas. So they had this unbelievable safety, which is the whole key to their cover 3, right? Dallas, the best player, and the key to everything they do is Parsons. So I think what's very clear is you need like an A-level stud, and then you build it around that. Because Earl Thomas made cover 3 work because the middle third of the field wasn't actually a third. It was like, 5/8.
He was a pencil eraser.
Yeah, he was just like, okay, you guys get the boundaries,
Right.
and I've got everything between the numbers. I would say a stud edge would be the number one thing. But, like, that Seattle defense also had Bobby Wagner. So that seems pretty
Well, that's where
important
I'm leaning. Like a true – I mean, when was the last time this team had a true dynamic Mike? London Fletcher in his prime.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
It's been a long time.
It certainly has.
I mean, you don't see them working with Jamin Davis to try and do what this staff did in his rookie year, right? To try and convert him to a true
I
Mike,
doubt
right?
it, but maybe. I mean,
Maybe.
but like, is Barton under contract?
I don't know. He was a one-year deal.
He was a one-year guy, so
and
yeah.
Khalil Hudson is a free agent as well.
Yeah. So
not
I
that
think
he's a true Mike.
No,
but,
he's definitely not a Mike.
Mayo, I think, is a free agent as well. But I mean,
see where Ron gets it up. That's where you'll find David Mayo. All due respect to David Mayo,
Yeah.
who's very good at the very few things that he does very well. Was that nice enough?
It was nice.
We're gonna make it.
Yeah.
work. All right.
I'm excited.
I'm excited to see what they do with it. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be talking about it, obviously. A lot of speculation until they start playing games, but through it all, Chris Russell 1-4 on the team 980. Of course, our show 4 till whenever there's a basketball game on any given day.
Like 6:45 tonight.
Like 6:45 tonight, which means what happens at 6:15?
Dave Johnson.
Hey, he really does listen to the show.
I listen.
He listens.
I
You just
listen.
turned it's funny. My wife sometimes will be like, "Why did you just turn into Jerry Seinfeld?" So I'm going to ask you, why did you just turn into Jerry Seinfeld? I listen to the show.
Well, you've got the Jewish part down, and I've got the New York part down, right?
Bingo, bango.
So, I mean, there you go. Right? That is right?
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
I just want to make sure.
It'd be like, Chris, we have to talk.
I just want to
here.
make sure I remember that correctly.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. All right, when we get back, a little bit more on Dan Quinn, some more thoughts on the offensive side of the ball, and then Dave does join us coming up at 6:15. Oh, there we go. We're back, YouTube. Sorry about that. Hopefully our sound hasn't been off for a long time. All right, so, Ant, we just talked with Russell about the defensive side of the ball and where it could go with Dan Quinn. Obviously, we know kind of what the scheme is likely to look like. Like, they're going to marry their coverage and their rush very well. He'll be creative with his fronts. He'll put guys in positions. I think, like, Daron Payne will line up on the edge at times this year in third down passing situations. Like, there'll be stuff there that's good and I think is a good fit with some of the personnel remaining. And we're going to find out real quick if Benjamin St. Juste and Emmanuel Forbes are good or they're not good because this coaching staff is so much better than the one that just left. But on the offensive side of the ball, that is the big question. And I think we assume that they'll hire someone off the Kyle Shanahan tree, of which there are a nearly endless list of options. But there is this report, or multiple reports, that Chip Kelly is going to get at least a conversation. And I think that's going to have a huge impact on, obviously, what personnel they keep. So we were talking in the break. Like, where are you at right now on kind of where this team goes offensively?
Yeah, because, again, we have a couple of guys that are going to be free agents coming up. We got Curtis Samuel, of course, and, he's actually one of the receivers that had a pretty good I think of the receivers, he had the best season, to be honest.
Expectations of anybody on offense.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of questions when it comes to Curtis Samuel. Also, what are you going to necessarily do with AG? So it's just a couple of questions with the personnel. We haven't even, talked about the offensive line, and I know a lot of people have looked at, who's going to be free agents this upcoming year on the offensive line, and it's not a lot of, household names, so it's going to be tough to, figure out, like, what to do up front, but I think you'll have to, help out the front, and the way you help out the front is with the people that are around, that are, outside of the line.
Yeah, so
I guess around it.
Yeah, no, I think that it's really appealing for 2024. Part of the appeal, I should say, for 2024 and hiring someone off the Shanahan tree is they know how to insulate bad offensive lines in that tree. Like, Houston's offensive line is not that good. Laramie Tunsil is freaking amazing. They have one, Hall of Fame good offensive lineman. Laramie Tunsil is the best pass-blocking left tackle in the league. The rest of their offensive line is not that good. Miami, their offensive line, not that good. But they run block really well, and they understand how to win with speed and schematically, use that to get the ball out quick. That also, by the way, matches their quarterback skill set. And that leads to the offensive line not being exposed in the way that, say, I don't know, a second-year quarterback with 19 career snaps going into his second year who has a problem holding on to the football and doesn't see the middle of the field particularly well, and you run an offense with a lot of long-developing route combinations, might not work. Little too on the nose, Ant?
No, I think it was very much on the nose,
appropriately.
Yeah, exactly.
Smashed it. So I think when you look at a guy like Curtis, I think he could be I would look at his market. My exit meeting with Curtis Samuel would be this: hey, we got to spend money in some other places. You should go try to make yourself money because that's the way the business works. I want you to come back. Just know that we want you. We just can't. We might not be able to afford you. But we're going to set a price that we know that we would really like to have you back at, because we think we have a role for you and we think you'd excel. But we just can't afford to not invest in other positions anymore. So here's the price. Hopefully we'll see you again in the spring. But realistically, I also think they might, it also depends for Curtis, what the new OC thinks of Jahan Dotson, right? Do they see Jahan Dotson as a number 2 receiver? And by the way, what do they see with Terry McLaurin? Because if they look at Terry and they go, that's a Z, guy that plays off the ball, as opposed to Terry who's been playing X on the ball, a little bit more motion, a little bit more free release, might loosen him up a little bit. And they see Jahan not as a Z, but as a zebra, a.k.a. what most of these West Coast Shanahan systems call their slot receiver, then there's not really a spot for Curtis Samuel. And he doesn't become worth any real investment where you want to go either sign or probably more appropriately draft a big X receiver who, even if they're not like a huge factor in the passing game as a rookie, like, if we're talking like 55, 60 catches, they're big bodied and they do the big body stuff that frees Terry to be more of a speed receiver. And that could be a really valuable allocation of resources because this draft has like 10 of those guys that like in other years might go in the second, first, third round. You might be able to get a stud like that in the fourth. So I think just the way that this offense is going to develop is obviously going to depend on the coordinator. But if you get one of these West Coast guys where you can get the right weapons on the outside and, get one tackle, and whether you survive with Wiley and or Leno, or you bump like Wiley inside, could you move Leno to right tackle, draft a stud left tackle, like whatever it is, the combination of staying and going, there are paths to them being much more serviceable. And I think it starts obviously with a great OC, which, what path doesn't start with a good coach?
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. Just talking about being able to navigate around a bad offensive line, but also then you have, the tight end position, which we still have to necessarily address. And I think we'll probably end up doing that through the draft. But what do you necessarily do with, a Cole Turner, or what do you necessarily do with who's the kid that got hurt in training camp?
Curtis Hodges. Didn't they already? Amari Rogers. You're talking about, or Armani Rogers?
Yeah.
Got hurt in wasn't even training camp. Got hurt in the spring. Rogers is super intriguing. Like if he's back and he's full speed, like you put him out there and you say, hey kid, there was a lot of hype around you last year. Let's see what you got. See if you can learn this system. It's a former college quarterback, so hopefully he picks it up pretty quickly and he's valuable. Cole Turner, like sorry dude, I got not a lot for you. Curtis Hodges they already cut. I tend to think that the tight end position is one where maybe, depending on the OC and depending on the relationships and whatever, like Logan Thomas could stay around. I think it's probably more likely you move on from him. But I tend to think in, like, those first 3 picks, top 50 picks that they have, I think you come out with some combination of quarterback, tackle, tight end, edge. Like those 4 positions are, I don't want to say stunned or surprised because it's too early in the process and there's too many factors for those second-round picks, but I tend to think that, or wide receiver, like those 3 picks, disperse them through those 5 positions, I would give you the field and feel confident that I'm going to get all 3 of those positions filled in the draft there. But I also do like the idea of a veteran on the offensive line as well, and they have all this draft capital. They also have all this cap space. We'll see how they spend it. All right, when we get back, though, switching on the court, Dave Johnson joins us. I'm live at the Bethesda Theater ahead of 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980, our live event tonight, which is sold out. Dave will join us live from the broadcast booth at Capital One Arena. That is next on The Hoffman Show.
You just know that if, anything is possible. That's why we tune in. That's why we love sports. But for the Wizards to beat the Clippers, you probably had a combination. He'd be a little bit below par, and the Wizards would be exceptional and, go nuts in some category, like three-point shooting, and it just didn't happen the other night. But this is a team that'll fight and scrap. And look, as you've got the Denny Avdia gift collection, he is clearly an example of that. I mean, it's like a fan in our Michelob Ultra postgame show said it best, that they appreciate the commitment of a Denny Avdia. They understand that they're on a journey, and they understand that, hey, listen, it can be, if you want to start following basketball, you can pick, a team that already is established. But what we're hoping is going to be so much sweeter once we get to that threshold of sustained success, which, again, this is why the Wizards are going through this season, because I do believe still, if it came back like last year, and if everyone was healthy, if Kristaps Porzingis, Kyle Kuzma, and Bradley Beal played more than 34 games, it's a playoff team. But they want to be more than just a playoff team.
Yeah, no, for sure. That would be the ultimate goal. I think the thing that was interesting about that third quarter the other night was, Brian Keefe calls a couple of timeouts, but ultimately it took some substitutions, and he was willing to make those changes. And we talked about that accountability piece and why ultimately Keefe is in that lead chair now. Like they came out, they were very flat in that third quarter. They did not have the pace that they want to play with, and that is kind of a requirement, a baseline fundamental for them this season is playing faster, and they played the Clippers' pace. And Glenn and I were talking about it with you, obviously, on the broadcast. And eventually, Kispert gets in. They pull Kuzma after he takes a couple of bad shots. And I actually look at that as encouraging. Obviously, the scoreline was not, but Keefe kind of pushing those buttons, willing to even. I mean, Kyle was one of the ones who said, hey, the bench is the ultimate receiving end of that, and I'm sure he's perfectly fine with it. But I thought that was a very interesting kind of subplot on the long game that took place in a micro example in that third quarter the other night.
Well, and again, look, everybody's not going to be on, every game, and so that's part of artificial intelligence. So yeah, some nights you're going to say, all right, well, he doesn't have it, so I've got to make a switch. But part of what it is, the trust that they're showing in, a Bilal Coulibaly. Again, we're going to talk. You're going to hear if you tune in to Brian Keefe talking before the game. I mean, my goodness, the experience he gets starting against the LA Clippers, the way he produced the LA Clippers, some of the defensive matchups he received against the LA Clippers. I loved hearing him say in the post game that he wished Paul George was also playing. So here's a young player that is like, bring it on. I'm thirsty, to keep getting better. The only way I'm going to get better is to be put in these challenging situations, and that's, quite frankly, what we're celebrating. And again, this team, whatever game's in, it's going to be about the competitiveness down the stretch. And I think we've seen that. And I don't have a problem with the way the team competed against the LA Clippers. I just think, there are nights you have to remember that the LA Clippers are a title contender.
Yeah.
I mean, when the sentence ends when you say Russell Westbrook comes off the bench. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah. I understand he's not 25-year-old Russell Westbrook, but still, as far as I can see, he could still attack and explode and disrupt. This is. I think we've talked about this before. In some ways, this is an enjoyable season, not because of losses, but I'm just enjoying the heck out of Daniel Gafford and what he's doing and the corner he's turning. Because, again, we knew we were not going to be sitting here in January saying, wow, if we get on a 3-game winning streak, maybe we'll get in the 6th seed. We knew that was not the script for this season. We are, celebrating individual accomplishments within a team game, if you will, because again, they want to be more competitive because that's how you get better. That's Mike Krzyzewski's in our pregame show tonight talking about Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones just finished in January. 15 games, he turned the ball over 15 times. The whole month. It's important to have him running the show right now. Now, again, this team is admittedly going to change. We don't know who's here necessarily for the long term, because this is the start of the process. It's finding which players are going to be around long term, or that you want to build around. Getting assets, because if you look at the successful models, again, what the Wizards are doing is not something they invented. It's not something that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins invented. It's been tried and proven in other places. If you get it right, if you get the right trades, if you get your trades right, if you build around the right players, if you draft correctly. And so, again, as we've talked about, and it states the obvious, it's not just getting the high draft pick and then you move on from there.
No doubt about it. Dave, of course, getting going at 6:45, so not too long from right now. He and Glenn on the pregame show, and then 7 o'clock tip-off. Or sorry, that is right. 7:15 is the game Monday against the Celtics. Yes. Too many things to keep track of, Dave. 6:45, because that means this is my last segment coming. 6:45 is the pregame, 7 o'clock tip tonight against the Heat. Dave, always appreciate your time, sir. Great to see you on Wednesday. Thanks again for the hat and the bobblehead, and we will talk to you next week.
And again, have a fantastic night there in Bethesda, and say hello to all my friends at the fan and Team 980, or at least people that I try to pretend that are my friends. So just say hello to some folks.
Hey, Dave Johnson says hi, guys. So Dave, he can't see you. It's just he's on the whatever. All right, thank you, Dave. When we get back, we will wrap up the show here from the Bethesda Theater. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, and always live as well on the free Odyssey app.
Wrapping up the Hoffman Show here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. You can see folks behind me if you're watching on YouTube is the Goon Squad is starting to show here for the Team 980 versus 106.7 The Fan tonight. Yeah, I put us first. What are you going to do about it? 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980 live. I'm live at the Bethesda Theater as that event is going to get going here in just a little bit. I think the doors actually open soon, which is also wild because, Anthony, I don't know if we ever did a sound check. So we're just going to go out there and assume everything works. Actually,
well, it is.
When I walked in today, there were mics and everything sitting on the chairs, which I'm going to guess they probably tested hours and hours and hours before we get there. I need to find whoever's running the audio, though, and make sure that Russell's mic is a little bit lower than everyone else's. You know.
Yeah.
That's not me taking a pot shot at Russell, to be very clear. Chris is just, he projects very well.
Yep, he does.
He projects very, very well. All right. So we're excited. Event sold out. Hope you have your ticket. Hope you're listening on your way. It's going to be a great event. Very excited. We'll get started just after 8 o'clock. So we had someone in the YouTube chat being like, is this the only live stream for the event tonight? This isn't the live stream for the event tonight. This is our radio show. It ends in 10 minutes, and the event tonight, what happens here stays here. There is no stream. There is no recording. There is no nothing. It is a live event. We told you we are on air or off air, on stage, uncensored. It is not for redistribution. If you didn't get your tickets, we tried to tell you. We played a billion D promos. Every one of the hosts on both stations was telling you about it for weeks. If you didn't get your tickets, that's on you. Or we're sorry that you live in some different part of the country and can't make it, because we definitely heard from those people too. Who knows? Maybe if tonight goes well, we'll take the show on the road. Probably not going to happen. Anthony, I'm just excited to go down into the green room area and eat some food and also not be in the coldest area in this entire building. I got stuck in the tundra.
Can you save me some food?
Yes. I just had this horrible realization because the food just went past and it smelled delicious. It could be laced with dairy, which is a problem for your boy. I'm going to have to make sure that I can actually eat something. If not, I'm going to have to. I walked in through the kitchen. I might just go back and be like, hey, do you guys have some food that I can eat back here?
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I'm a pain in the butt. I didn't choose to be this way. I would love to have cheese, which is definitely something Danny's going to make fun of me for tonight. All right. So next week, by the way, Monday, I believe, is going to be the introductory press conference for Dan Quinn. We haven't gotten that official yet. They haven't actually made this official yet, which I do think is interesting. The Commanders haven't announced the hire, so I don't know what they're waiting for, but that'll get done, and then they'll ultimately on Monday, I think, introduce him. So who knows what our show looks like on Monday on the heels of that, and when that press conference actually is, will obviously have a very large factor. Tuesday, I will be on an airplane to Las Vegas, and so I'm not exactly sure. I guess I could turn around and yell at the boss and find out someone will be here on Tuesday. Probably Doc or Linnell. That's tend to be how that goes. So you'll be in great, capable hands on Tuesday, and then Wednesday we are live on Radio Row. We have some amazing broadcasters and journalists book. We have some players, some former players. You know how Radio Row is if you've listened to radio shows over the years that are out there. Who knows what's going to happen? I have so many great friends in this industry, and so many of them have already said, yep, I'm down. I'll stop by. So it's just going to be a crazy week of basically nonstop guests Wednesday to Friday from Radio Row in Las Vegas. We will bring all the camera equipment, so we'll be live on YouTube for the whole thing as well. And if you do miss any of it, it's okay. We will not only forgive you, we will also give you a podcast so you can catch up. You can check out that podcast, the Hoffman Show podcast, anywhere you get your pods, including the free Odyssey app. Anthony, let's do the honors.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
The culture is actually damn good.
All right, we got two today, both NFL adjacent. Next week in Las Vegas, of course, the Super Bowl. And, well, there's been a lot of cameras and eyes on suites lately, specifically on the Chiefs side of things. But for Christian McCaffrey's family, despite the fact that his dad played in the NFL, Christian has signed a very lucrative contract. His girlfriend, actually I believe fiance at this point, is a former Miss Universe who does quite well for herself. Christian's mom, Lisa, says they can't get a suite for the Super Bowl. Why?
He asked, just how expensive are those Super Bowl tickets that Christian has to buy?
That is probably the question of the hour. You have no idea. So yeah, we looked into a suite, and none of us can afford it. Not even Christian Moneybags over there, and nor Moneybags Olivia. So we are not in a suite. I'll tell you that right now. We did negotiate like a different, like an area. I don't exactly understand what it is, but anyway, we are in there, and probably part of the problem was I wanted 8 tickets together because I felt strongly about everybody being together. So anyway, long story short, they're outrageously expensive. They're stupid expensive. As I don't know if it's the Taylor Swift factor, if it's the first time in Vegas factor. There's so much going on.
Here's what it is. It is not the Taylor Swift factor. However, because she's a billionaire, she'll be able to afford them. Those suites are designed for corporations to buy. Like, not individuals, not even super rich individuals. They are designed for corporations or people that are worth as much as a corporation to buy. So that's why those tickets are so expensive. Sorry to Lisa McCaffrey. You're only very rich compared to I'm an actual corporation rich. Tough break, Ant. Tough break.
Definitely.
Tough break for Sauce Gardner at the Pro Bowl games. He ran into young Aiden Diggs, nephew of Stephon Diggs.
What's good, man? How you doing, man? I see you. Who your uncle? Who your uncle? When I talk trash about...
And look what happened.
What?
He scored on you that week 1 game.
I don't remember that, but hey, if you say he did, go ahead.
This man done went to week 1, man.
Hey,
went to week 1, so.
Your uncle good at football, man. Yeah. Hey, no, this is the thing. He gonna dap me up first and then say that though. So do you mess with me?
Young Aiden Diggs, a savage. All right, that does it for our show live from the Bethesda Theater. Tonight, we're on stage, off-air, uncensored, getting going here shortly. We'll see you Monday as long as we survive back here on the radio.